It was supposed to be just another quiet night on the farm. The chickens settled, the wind whispered through the fields, and everything seemed ordinary. I froze when I noticed something on the night camera. Unclear at first. Just a shape. But it made my heart skip, the kind of unease you can feel deep in your bones. At first, I tried to reason it out. A raccoon. Maybe a fox. Something explainable. But the coop didn't look right. Locked tight. Still, nothing should have been able to get in. The camera angle revealed movement slow, deliberate, upright. Not a shadow, not a trick of the light. Every frame made my disbelief worse. My decades on the farm had never prepared me for this. This wasn't just a thief in the night. This was the night that changed everything. I've always lived a quiet life. My name is Robert James. I'm 67. And after decades of working the land, I retired a few years ago. The farm has been my world for longer than I care to admit. And now, without the rush of daily chores, it's just me, the chickens, and the slow rhythm of the seasons. Living alone has its advantages. Peace, control, predictable days. I wake early, check the chickens, make sure the fences hold, tend to what little garden I have left, and spend the rest of the day reading, walking the property, or simply watching the skies change. The neighbors are kind but distant, and honestly, I prefer it that way. There's a comfort in solitude, in knowing every tree, every blade of grass, every smell in the wind. I've spent decades around animals, cows, dogs, cats, chickens, even a few foxes over the years. I know their habits, their fears, their patterns. I can tell when a chicken is uneasy, when a fox has been sniffing around the property, when a raccoon is likely to cause mischief. I've dealt with predators, storms, broken fences, and even theft once or twice, but never anything like what was about to happen. Legends of Bigfoot or wild men in the woods. I never gave them a second thought. To me, those were stories for thrill seekers or bored campers. I trust what I can see, what I can track, and what I can explain. The idea of a creature wandering through my land at night never crossed my mind. Nights on the farm have always been predictable. The roosters crow in the morning, the chickens settle before sunset, and the world slows down. The quiet is comforting, almost like a blanket, and I've cherished it since retirement. Even when a storm rolls in, I find a rhythm in it, a pattern to the wind, the rain, the shadows cast by the moon. But in the weeks leading up to that night, subtle changes began to unsettle me. Chickens were missing, not often, but enough to make me take notice. Fences were intact. Gates were closed. Nothing made sense. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I had left a door slightly ajar. Maybe a fox was cleverer than I thought. The thought lingered, but didn't worry me too much. After all, I had seen it all, or so I thought. I never imagined that these small, unsettling hints were just the beginning. They were the prelude to a night that would shatter the quiet, predictable life I had built, and force me to question everything I believed about the safety and solitude of my farm. Nightfall on the farm always carried a certain weight. A stillness that was both comforting and sharp in its clarity. The moment the sun dipped behind the hills, the world changed. The chickens retreated to their coop, the crickets began their persistent chorus, and the wind whispered low through the trees. I learned long ago to listen to every sound, to know the difference between the usual night chorus and something that didn't belong. The air was cold that evening, sharper than I expected for early spring. It seeped through my jacket and bit at my fingers as I walked the perimeter of the coop, making sure every lock and latch was secure. My boots pressed softly into the soil, leaving faint impressions that I could trace later if needed. The moon cast a dim light over the farm, enough to outline the shapes of the coop, the fence, and the scattered hay, but not enough to reveal details. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the yard, merging with the dark edges of the fields beyond. The smells of the farm at night were just as familiar as the sights. Damp soil, hay still warm from the day, and the faint musk of the chickens themselves. Each scent carried memories, decades of tending to animals, cleaning pens and listening to the soft coos and clucks of creatures that depended on me. I knew the farm in ways most people never would. The exact rustle of leaves when the wind shifted, the soft thud of a bird settling, the slight creak of an old wooden fence reacting to temperature changes, locking the coops and checking. The night cameras had become part of my routine, a ritual I performed every evening. Each latch clicked in place, each camera angle checked, and each motion sensor reset. I had done it thousands of times, and I thought I could trust it. The rhythm of the work was calming, almost meditative, a comfort in an otherwise quiet and isolated world. And yet, there was isolation. Real, undeniable isolation. The farm sat miles from the nearest neighbor, surrounded by fields, woods, and the occasional winding dirt road. Beyond the faint hum of the distant highway, there was only silence. That silence could be soothing, but it could also feel heavy, like the air itself was holding its breath. On most nights, it was a good companion, a reminder that the farm was mine and mine alone. On nights like this, the world felt suspended. Every sound carried weight, a rustle in the brush, a faint scuff near the coop, the distant howl of a coyote. My senses were alert, not out of fear, but because that was life here. I knew the rhythm of the night, the pattern of movements, the ebb and flow of wind and wildlife. And I trusted it. Until that night. Because even in a world I knew so well, the stillness of the night could hide things I had never imagined. Things that would make me question everything I thought I knew about my farm, my life, and what really moved in the shadows. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly at first. The chickens, usually calm at night, began to act. Strangely, their clucks grew sharper, more urgent. Feathers ruffled as if a cold breeze had passed through the coop, even when the night air was still. They'd huddle together in corners, eyes wide, scanning shadows that I couldn't see. At first, I chalked it up to the usual predators, a raccoon, maybe a fox. I'd lived with them all my life and knew their tricks. But the coop seemed undisturbed, the locks tight, the fencing intact. And yet the unease grew. Something had spooked them, though I could not put a finger on what. Neighbors occasionally stopped by for casual conversation, and when I mentioned the odd behavior, they laughed it off. "Just old age, Robert," one said, smiling politely. "Animals get jittery. Nothing to worry about." I wanted to believe them. I needed to believe it. Old stories of wild men or creatures roaming the woods were nonsense, the kind of tales told by those who fancied themselves hunters or storytellers. I never gave them a second thought, never had. And yet, that gut feeling lingered. It twisted in my stomach in a way I hadn't felt in years, a warning I wanted to ignore. Farmers develop instincts, honed over decades, that tell them when something is off. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself it was fatigue, shadows playing tricks, the moonlight casting strange shapes across the yard. Logical explanations, each one reasonable, each one comforting. But the chickens did not lie. They could not. Their panic was real, instinctual, and relentless. Each night, their unease intensified. I would check the perimeter, glance at the fence, walk the paths I knew so well, but everything seemed normal, perfectly ordinary. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was moving just beyond what my eyes could see. Just outside the safety of the familiar. I told myself it was nothing. That the stories I'd scoffed at as a young man remained exactly that, stories. But ignoring the warnings only made the nights heavier, the shadows darker, the quiet louder. And with each passing evening, I knew, even if I couldn't yet admit it, that the calm I'd depended on for decades was beginning to fracture. The first night it happened, I almost didn't believe it. One chicken was missing. Just gone. I counted every bird before heading to bed, as usual, 15 in total. When I checked at sunrise, there were 14. My heart sank, but I told myself it had to be a fox or a raccoon. I'd seen them slip past the fencing before. That was all it could be. I reviewed the night camera footage, hoping for a simple explanation. The timestamp blinked, 2:17 a.m. at first. I saw only the familiar shapes of shadows, the gentle sway of the coop in the moonlight. But then movement slow, deliberate, too upright to be a fox. My hands trembled as I zoomed in, squinting at the grainy image. Something large, darker than the night, crossed in front of the coop and disappeared into the trees. I spent the next morning reinforcing the coop. Every lock checked, every latch tightened. Fences double-checked, motion sensors reset. I even angled the cameras differently, hoping to catch anything that tried to sneak in. It felt excessive, almost paranoid, but my instincts screamed that I needed to be thorough. Still, I told myself it was just precaution. Surely this would prevent it from happening again. The second night proved me wrong. By 1:58 a.m., the camera alerted me again. I froze in the dark bedroom, listening to the faint sounds outside, the soft, almost deliberate shuffle of something moving along the ground. My stomach tightened. I grabbed the monitor and peered into the grainy image. There it was again, a large figure, upright, moving toward the coop with a deliberate pace that no animal could match. Every security measure I had put in place seemed irrelevant. The creature moved carefully, deliberately, as if it knew exactly what it was doing. I couldn't understand it. No predator I had ever dealt with behaved this way. The air in the farmyard felt heavier that night, the shadows darker. My decades of experience told me one thing. I was witnessing something entirely unfamiliar. By the third night, I was awake before the first camera alert. Heart pounding, I patrolled the perimeter, flashlight in hand. Nothing appeared at first. And then movement. The creature's silhouette passed just beyond the fence, tall, heavy, deliberate. It didn't run. It didn't panic. It approached, took a chicken, and vanished as silently as it had appeared. My breath caught, and for the first time, I couldn't rationalize it. That moment changed everything. I realized that no amount of locks, fences, or cameras would stop it. It wasn't working against me. It was working on its own terms, and I was only an observer. My farm, my sanctuary of decades, had been invaded by something intelligent, deliberate, and entirely beyond my understanding. I felt a mix of fear and awe. Fear for what I had seen, for what might come next. Awe that something like this could exist in the quiet woods I had thought I knew so well. The theft was no longer about chickens. It was about understanding that my world, my farm, and my reality had shifted. Nothing would ever be the same. After that second night, I thought maybe it had stopped. I told myself it was just a fluke, a clever predator taking advantage of an unlocked gate or a lapse in routine. I tried to return to normal, patrolling the farm as usual, checking fences, and settling the chickens before bed. But then came the sounds. A soft shuffle near the coop, just beyond the reach of the porch light. At first, I froze, listening. The sound wasn't loud, but it carried a weight, a deliberate pace. My heart thumped in my chest, but I forced myself to investigate. Flashlight in hand, I circled the coop, checking for signs of entry tracks, broken fencing, or anything unusual. Nothing. Not a paw print, not a scratch, not a single clue. Just the faint rustle of the wind through the hay. I shook my head and muttered to myself, raccoon, fox, nothing else. My rational mind demanded it. I returned to the house, checked the locks again, and climbed into bed, trying to ignore the lingering unease in my gut. Hours later, the camera alerted me again. I groaned, grabbing the monitor with trembling hands. The figure appeared closer this time, heavier and more deliberate. It didn't linger in the shadows. It moved with intent, scanning, watching, testing boundaries I had thought were secure. Every movement was calculated, purposeful. I watched for what felt like hours, heart pounding. My sleep shattered. The pattern was undeniable. This wasn't a random predator. It wasn't a trick of the light or a simple animal looking for a meal. The creature was returning on its own schedule, studying the coop, studying me, testing its limits. I began to notice the subtle signs during the day as well. Feathers disturbed in patterns I didn't recognize, soft impressions in the soil beyond the fence, shadows in the corner of my vision that vanished when I turned my head. It was teasing, almost deliberate, and that realization, the awareness that this was no ordinary theft, settled heavily on my shoulders. I could no longer ignore what was happening, no longer rely on my decades of experience to explain it. Something intelligent, something deliberate, was moving through my farm, and I was powerless to stop it. Sleep became uneasy. Nights felt longer. The farm, once a place of comfort and predictability, now seemed alive in a way I couldn't control. Every rustle of the trees, every whisper of the wind, carried with it a tension I couldn't escape. The creature had made its presence known, and I was beginning to understand that it wasn't going away anytime soon. It was a sound I knew well, or so I thought. Heavy, deliberate footsteps outside the coop, each one pressing into the soil with a weight that no animal I had ever tended could produce. At first, I tried to dismiss it. My mind searched for rational explanations. A deer perhaps, though they never walked so steadily. A neighbor passing by? But the road was empty, miles away. The chickens didn't need an explanation. Their panic was immediate, visceral. They clucked in alarm, flapping and scrambling, feathers ruffled as though sensing something far more dangerous than any predator I had known. I froze, listening. The rhythm of those steps didn't match the subtle scurries of raccoons or the cautious pads of foxes. They were deliberate, they were. Wrong. I wanted to convince myself it was nothing. I told myself it was the shadows playing tricks in the moonlight, the wind shifting oddly across the coop, even my imagination heightened by the recent thefts. But my instincts as a farmer, honed over decades of tending animals and guarding against predators, screamed otherwise. Something was out there that didn't belong. Something that I had no name for. My heart raced. Every rational explanation fell away under the weight of my gut feeling. I had spent a lifetime reading animals, predicting their behavior, understanding threats. Nothing in my experience fit this. The footsteps were too slow, too heavy, too deliberate. They carried an intelligence, a patience that no wild creature I had ever encountered possessed. I didn't move immediately. I wanted to wait, to see if logic could catch up with instinct. But the unease, the knowledge that something deliberate was moving near my chickens, became unbearable. I made the choice that would change everything. I grabbed the monitor and reviewed the night camera footage again, as I had countless times before, but now with a different purpose. I needed to see it for myself, to confront what my instincts already knew. The grainy images revealed something that my mind tried and failed to rationalize. Shadows shifted, upright forms appeared, movements deliberate and intelligent. It wasn't human, and it wasn't any animal I could name. Every movement carried a weight and intention that unsettled me more than words could describe. In that moment, the world I had known, the quiet, predictable life of my farm, felt like it was slipping. The ordinary had been replaced by the inexplicable. My decades of experience meant nothing in the face of something I couldn't explain. But I also knew one thing clearly. Ignoring it would be far worse than acknowledging it. I continued to watch. Heart pounding, instincts fully awake, knowing that the events of this night were no longer just about missing chickens. Something had arrived on my farm that night, something I couldn't name. And it was testing me and my world far more than I was ready to accept. I watched the footage again, the grainy images flickering on the small monitor, and my disbelief grew with each frame. At first, it was nothing more than a shadow near the coop. A dark, indistinct form, barely distinguishable from the night, shifting along the edge of the yard. My mind tried to dismiss it. Trees, moonlight, a trick of the camera, but something in the way it moved made me freeze. It wasn't like a fox or raccoon, the way it lingered, almost measuring the space before taking another step. The second stage made my stomach twist. The figure began to move upright. I leaned closer, squinting, trying to make sense of the motion. No animal I had ever seen moved like this. It wasn't hunched or padded softly across the soil it strode. Deliberate and measured like a human, but too large, too heavy. The shadows stretched unnaturally behind it, revealing a broad chest and long arms, hands swinging slightly at its sides. My decades of experience reading creatures told me immediately, this wasn't a simple predator. This was something intelligent, calculating. By the third stage, the full figure came into view. My hands trembled as I adjusted the zoom, trying to catch every detail. The creature stood taller than the coop door well, over 7 feet, maybe closer to 8. Its frame was massive, covered in dark hair that caught the faint glow of the night vision. I could see its hands, long fingers moving with purpose, nudging a chicken into a safe corner rather than smashing it or panicking it into frenzy. Its movements were deliberate, methodical, almost thoughtful. The face was partially visible. Eyes dark, intelligent, observing everything with awareness. A brow that seemed to furrow, nostrils flaring slightly as it sniffed the air. It wasn't human. Not in any sense I had ever encountered. And yet, it wasn't merely an animal either. There was a presence there, a sentience that I could feel through the tiny, flickering frames of the camera. Every decision, every step, every glance carried meaning. It watched, it assessed, and it acted. I compared its height to the coop door again, the scale impossible to ignore. A creature this large should have caused destruction in its movements, but there was none. No damage to the fence, no chaos among the chickens, just precision, control, and a strange sort of respect for the space it moved through. Every gesture suggested awareness, intelligence, and somehow a code of conduct. I rewound and paused the footage repeatedly, trying to convince myself I was seeing things. But the evidence was undeniable. The creature's behavior didn't match anything I had seen in the wild. Its upright stance, the careful placement of hands, the way it manipulated objects, all pointed to something far beyond instinct. It was as if it understood cause and effect, as if it recognized the farm as its own territory, or at least as a space it could navigate without unnecessary violence. I felt a mix of awe and dread. Here was something that defied all logic, all explanation. The old stories I had scoffed at, the legends I dismissed as nonsense, suddenly pressed themselves against my reality. I had always trusted my senses, my experience with animals, my intuition about the natural world, but this was beyond anything I could categorize. For the first time, I realized that what I was seeing wasn't simply a thief, a predator, or a wandering creature. It was something in between. Not fully animal, not fully human. A being that occupied a space I had never known existed, and now, through the lens of my night camera, it had revealed itself. The farm, my sanctuary, my quiet world, it had been entered by something utterly extraordinary. As I sat there, staring at the monitor, I knew I would never see the farm the same way again. Every shadow, every rustle, every nightfall held a new weight. And every time I recalled the creature's deliberate movements, I felt both fear and an inexplicable respect. It wasn't violent. It wasn't chaotic. But it was real. And it was watching. The first time I truly understood what I was witnessing, fear began to shift into something else. Shock, awe, and a strange, reluctant admiration. Watching the footage again and again, I noticed it. The creature wasn't violent. It didn't strike, snarl, or destroy. Its focus was on the chickens, yes, but in a way that suggested curiosity and purpose, not malice. It moved deliberately, almost gently, around them, as though it understood their place, their value, their vulnerability. I've spent my life as a caretaker of animals. I've learned to read their moods, to anticipate their needs, to respond to their fears. And for the first time, I saw that instinct reflected back at me from something not human, yet not purely wild. There was awareness in its movements, precision, patience, an almost conscious respect for the life it encountered. It was doing something I couldn't name, something that challenged everything I believed about the world outside my farm. I felt conflicted. My mind told me to be cautious, to consider my safety, to call for help, to secure the coop, to do something definitive. But another part of me, the part that had spent decades tending these animals, urged patience. The creature wasn't harming them. It wasn't threatening me in any overt way. Its presence, though unsettling, seemed purposeful in a way that no ordinary predator or thief could achieve. The internal struggle was constant. Every instinct I had screened to act, yet every observation suggested that interference could do more harm than good. I wanted to confront it, to chase it off, but I hesitated, watching as it adjusted its position around the coop, handled the chickens with care, and moved without unnecessary force. It was methodical, calm, deliberate. Nothing about it suggested mindless aggression. I realized then that I had misjudged the situation entirely. This wasn't a creature driven by hunger, fear, or chaos. It wasn't here to steal or destroy. It was observing, interacting, and in a way I couldn't yet fully comprehend, communicating through its actions. Every gesture, every motion, carried intention. There was intelligence there, a thoughtfulness that unsettled me, but also drew me into a strange respect for its presence taught by the third viewing of the footage. The fear that had gripped me during the first nights had transformed. It was replaced with awe. This was not a monster. It wasn't a threat in the traditional sense. It was something else entirely, something that existed in a space I had never known existed, yet operated under rules I could recognize. Its deliberate actions mirrored my own approach to the farm. Careful, intentional, respectful. That realization weighed heavily on me. For decades, I had seen the world in black and white terms: predator or prey, human or animal, friend or threat. But here, in the middle of the night, through a flickering camera screen, I confronted a reality that existed between those definitions. It wasn't chaos. It wasn't malice. It was something else, a being that demanded observation, reflection, and above all, understanding. In the quiet aftermath of that realization, I felt both humbled and unsettled. My farm, my life, my routine, all had been invaded by something extraordinary. Yet, in that same invasion, there was a lesson. Fear could give way to comprehension, and awe could exist alongside caution. This creature was no mindless thief. It was deliberate, intelligent, and for reasons I could not yet articulate, profoundly aware of its actions and their consequences. The nights after that third encounter were long, restless, and filled with the faint, unshakable sense that I wasn't alone. I found myself returning to the footage repeatedly, frame by frame, over and over again. Every time I watched it, I noticed something new. The way the creature paused before each chicken, the subtle movements of its hands, the intelligence behind its every action. It wasn't random. It wasn't chaotic. It was deliberate, precise, and aware. Physical evidence began to appear around the co-op. Tiny, deep impressions in the soil where the creature had knelt or shifted its weight. Feathers disturbed in patterns I couldn't explain. Nothing was destroyed, no fences broken, no signs of a struggle. Chickens were missing at times, yet the surrounding area remained undisturbed. I couldn't reconcile the destruction or lack thereof with what I knew about predators. This wasn't a mindless thief. This was something far more calculated. I struggled with what to do with the footage. Part of me wanted to hide it forever, keep the secret to myself, protect my quiet life from ridicule or intrusion. But another part of me knew that the evidence was undeniable. It demanded to be seen, to be understood, even if only by a select few who might grasp its significance. I decided to share it carefully, only with a handful of trusted individuals. Knowing that the world was not ready for what I had captured, reactions were mixed, as I expected. Some dismissed it outright, calling it a hoax, a trick of light, a misinterpreted shadow. Others were intrigued, fascinated, even awed. A few asked questions I couldn't answer, theories I couldn't confirm. The footage ignited curiosity and skepticism in equal measure, but it also validated what I had already known. I wasn't imagining it. Something extraordinary had entered my farm, and it had left traces I could neither ignore nor explain. Despite sharing selectively, nights never felt the same. Every rustle in the brush, every soft thump against the coop, every shadow cast by the moon made my heart race. I patrolled the perimeter more carefully, checked the cameras more frequently, and kept the chickens closer than ever before. But even with these measures, I knew in my heart that the creature wasn't deterred by fences, locks, or alarms. It came and went on its own terms, silent, observant, and deliberate. The farm, once a place of comfort and routine, had changed forever. The quiet that had once been a balm now carried a subtle tension, a reminder that the ordinary was no longer guaranteed. I began to notice continued signs of its presence: impressions in soil, subtle disturbances in the co-op, glimpses of movement at the edge of the yard. Each sighting, each clue, reinforced what I already knew. The creature was still here, watching, moving, living alongside me in the shadows. I learned, slowly, to adjust to this new reality. Fear became tempered with respect, anxiety softened by awe. I couldn't control its visits, couldn't predict its actions, but I could observe, understand, and coexist. The farm had been invaded, not violently, not destructively, but profoundly. Its presence challenged everything I believed about my world, about nature, about the creatures that might exist just beyond the edge of sight. Even now, weeks later, I checked the cameras before bed, listened for the slightest sound, and sensed the weight of its presence. The experience has altered my perception of the farm, of the night, of life itself. What I thought was routine, predictable, and safe has become something extraordinary, a constant reminder that the world is larger and stranger than I had ever imagined. And somewhere out there, in the shadows of the coop and the moonlit fields, it continues to move quiet, deliberate, and aware. In the weeks and months since that night, I've thought often about what it all meant. At first, fear dominated my thoughts, fear of the unknown, fear of what could be out there, fear of losing the life I had built. But as I reviewed the footage, observed the subtle signs, and reflected on the creature's deliberate actions, that fear began to give way to understanding. I realized something essential. Not everything that is unknown or unfamiliar is evil. Not every shadow in the night carries danger. There are mysteries that challenge our perception without threatening our lives, creatures whose intelligence and presence demand respect rather than terror. For the first time in decades, I confronted the limits of my own understanding and accepted that some parts of the world remain beyond simple explanation. This shift in perspective reframed the entire event. What I initially saw as theft, intrusion, or threat revealed itself to be something entirely different, a coexistence, however quiet and unsettling, with a being I could neither categorize nor control. It moved through my farm with awareness, yet without harm. Its actions were precise, intelligent, and respectful, forcing me to reconsider the rigid definitions of predator, human, and animal that had guided me my entire life. Now, when I walk the farm at night, the quiet carries a different weight. The wind through the trees, the rustle of the chickens, the dim glow of the moon, all of it feels alive in ways I had never noticed before. The farm is still mine, but it is shared with something extraordinary. Something that reminds me to remain humble, alert, and open to the wonders that exist just beyond the edge of sight. I leave you with this thought. How many of the things we fear most are simply unknowns waiting for us to observe and understand? What stories lie hidden in the shadows around us, waiting to be recognized for what they truly are rather than what we imagine them to be? If there's one thing I've learned from that night, it's that the world is far larger and stranger than we can ever fully comprehend, and sometimes the most extraordinary experiences come not from confronting monsters, but from learning to coexist with the extraordinary.